Leftover lasagna.
Leftover lasagna.
Lasagna? No way.
It's a type of sandwich.
Some kind of gross pasta.
Leftover lasagna is a
podcast
hosted by
my
Nitin
church
Sundar and Tony Uncle. Leftover lasagna.
Very funny name.
Hello and welcome to Leftover Lasagna episode 16, or as amateur mathematicians would be eager to point out, episode 4 square. 4 square or 16 episodes ago, our forefathers brought forth upon this contingent a new podcast conceived in frivolity and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equally stupid. I am Tony, the guy who thinks he can do wordplay with force and foreplay with words. And joining me, those were words from the Gettysburg Address. But my host, Nitin Sundar, is the one who makes women say, I want to send my jetties. Please give your address. The best part of that is how you saw that punchline coming even before I said it.
Yeah. Once you said Gettysburg, I knew where this was going. Thanks, Tony. Yet another mind-bending intro. Dear listener, you can rewind and listen to it one more time to understand all the puns that Tony cracked. You mentioned Foursquare, which immediately, of course, reminds any 90s Indian cricket fan of the famous Foursquare television ads that used to come in the 90s, around the time India used to go to Canada to play Pakistan in the Sahara Cup.
In the what club? Curling club. Skating and curling club. Where you play cricket.
Yeah, imagine having an entire club where people, sit with their hairs, braided, waiting for them to curl slowly. That really was the time when commercialism in cricket really exploded, right? The 90s. You had Pepsi and Coke. Coke
Cola
would spoof
wars.
Pepsi's ads and, the Cola wars. And you had other brands also getting in. Foursquare was that interesting budget brand because they did not go for the Tendulkars or the Azharuddins or the Kumble's who would have been the obvious choices. They had Venkatesh Prasad, Nayan Mongia, Sanjay Manjrekar, and Sabha Karim, if I remember, in that ad, right? Who are like players who are hang on, we also have a piece of this pie. How nice is it? Right? But one of the most memorable ads because they go rowing a catamaran and they overtake an actual
Catamaran,
bunch.
no? It's a snake boat of sorts. Isn't it?
It's more like a canoe. You're right. I don't know. I have no idea.
Canoe. Yeah.
The twist, of course, is that they are rowing with cricket bats, which have the Foursquare sticker on them, as opposed to using oars. And they overtake another canoe, which is actually being oared forth by Keralite boatmen. And there's some very interesting Kerala-style music in the background as well in this ad, if you remember.
Foursquare cricket gear. You never know what you can become.
Of course.
Lest we forget, Rajesh Chauhan was also a part of that ad. India's answer to Shakil and Mushtaq. A very bad answer, but an answer nevertheless.
There would have been only 4 people in that ad, no? I feel like we're counting
ad, there
someone
were 4
extra.
people. No, I think there were multiple Foursquare ads.
Oh, really? Okay, maybe. Yeah, but
in which, of course, 4 people would show up. Yeah,
second
it makes
tier.
sense that there are 4 people. All second
So
tier,
if the ad was made today, it would feature Sanju Samson. Like, this is where we're going.
In the other boat, because he is an actual Keralite.
In the second.
Here also Sanju Samson ignored.
But Nitin, we have called this the Weekly-ish podcast when it is anything but, right? Now, this is the podcast where we record whenever Nitin is not on a holiday. So, tremendous earth-shaking moments have happened since our last episode, right? And on our other cricket podcast, Bits and Pieces, we famously have this thing called the BNP Jinx, okay? So, if you remember, long ago on episode 15, I had introduced myself and you as Donald Trump and Joe Biden, respectively, right? And in the intervening period, one guy nearly has been assassinated, and the other guy has stepped out from the presidential race. What is happening with it?
Not only has he stepped down from the presidential race, now I'm seeing tweets saying he's not going to survive the night, things like that, because he was down with COVID.
Hospice care, some of the things. Yeah.
But apparently he is back and just going back to office now, having recovered from COVID. We hope Joe Biden can see through the rest of his term and continue to live for as long
Yeah.
as he wants
Yeah.
to. But yeah,
And
the BNP jinx well and truly translates into leftover lasagna. So
what we're saying is, Srinath and Nisha, you better watch out. Like, look left, look right, look left again before you cross the road, because you're the other two people who recently mentioned on the pod.
also Yuval Noah Harari. But uh,
Oh yeah, you.
I'm waiting for him to react. Also, he's not reactive. Like, okay, move on. Now, Template is reacting now.
We've
Useless fellow.
mentioned them on the past 15. Mentioned him on the past 15 plus episodes. So I think he's okay.
Oh, his jinx proof is what
immune.
you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's immune. Yeah.
He's immune. Possible. Yeah. Herd immunity. Herd immunity is what you get if you have heard many episodes of Leftover Lasagna where you are mentioned.
That's super.
Yeah.
Friends,
What are
Romans
your
and
initial
countrymen,
thoughts?
lend me your ears. This is the episode. Initial thoughts.
What were
when
your
the shooting
initial
happened.
thoughts when you saw the Donald Trump clip? I mean, I must say, remark, even if it was stage managed, I don't know if it was. I don't
of course
think it
not.
was,
What do you-
but I wouldn't put anything beyond
No, so
Donald Trump.
no, Trevor Noah he's got a podcast which is called What Now? I think the first episode was with The Rock, the second episode was with Bill Gates, etc. But in between, there are these episodes where he just talks to his friends and producers, and those are far more interesting episodes than the celeb ones, right? So he was basically talking about how in 2024 there is more news than ever, and there has never been less consensus on the truth than ever, right? Like, it is interesting.
Yeah.
Like, you're also simultaneously updated on everything that is supposedly happening around the world, and no two people can agree, right? Like, no two people can even agree on what is the correct conspiracy theory for this event that has happened, which is strange,
Yeah.
right? No, but all
Yeah,
said and
true.
done, I mean, glad he dodged a bullet. Or, I mean, after Hulk Hogan came and embraced him, I don't know. Are you suggesting that he like activated a blood patch in his ear and then like?
So you know what those blood patches actually are in very low budget films. You know
Yeah.
how that thing works.
Or
They actually fill
WWE.
condoms. I don't know what happens in WWE, but this I know for sure because my dad has been in actual movie sets.
Oh, yeah.
In
Great.
you know, they actually fill condoms with red ink,
Nice.
and somebody has to activate them.
Are they that easy to break? I would be really worried then.
It's a good question. I don't think they break them. I think they just overflow them from the top itself. Like you activate them and it just from the mouth of the condom. I don't know, to be honest. Anything's possible.
mean-
But if you've seen, you watched Better Call Saul, right? One of the great TV
of
shows.
course.
In which Saul Goodman, who plays the eponymous lawyer, who's the hero of the, or rather the tragic hero of the show, keeps stage managing situations that could benefit him, right? So, and he even has a series of amateur cameramen, photographers whom he takes along with him, and gets like good shots, which he can then use on media to curry favors, etc. That photo of Donald Trump, that image from below with the American flag, and he's pumping his fist,
What an image,
absolutely reminded me of one of my favorite TV shows. So, I don't know. I hope. I don't even know what I hope for. Do I hope it was real? No, I hope it was actually not real, because I hope we live in a safer world than one where someone can take a passing slingshot at the person with the most security in the world. But I also hope it was not stage managed. So I don't know what I want. Also, not only can we not agree on the truth, we can't even agree on what we want. So that's the problem. Problem of choice.
No, I think this is the podcast, right? I think we are two people who are happy to admit that we are winging it at all points in time. And that is probably the best way to live, is to wing it, but also accept that you're winging it, right? There is no higher purpose, right? Like, basically, dumpster fire in search of dopamine, as one of the memes would say. That's literally it, right? But interestingly
But let's be
enough,
clear, one of us is the actual wing commander, and the other one is barely a wing squadron leader. That would be you, because you come in with actual talking points to the show. I come and react to whatever you have to say. This is what broadly happens, and it's the smartness of my subterfuge that you don't realize that this is what actually happens on Leftover Lasagna.
Okay, so the topic for the day, interestingly, moving on from the whole Joe Biden Trump thing, is broadly around nationalism, but maybe around patriotism also. and there is a difference between the two apparently, and where we stand, right? So, Nitin, why don't you start it off with your opening remarks on this topic that you suggested?
It looks like both of us have gone through the same essay by George Orwell, where he makes a distinction, between patriotism and nationalism. And of course, George Orwell is also the person who uttered those famous words: "Sport is war minus the shooting." I'm sure we'll get to that as well. But yeah, nationalism, right? This probably is true for every generation of people, and so I caveat it when I say that it feels right now that we are living in a world which is much more nationalistic, filled with much more nationalist fervor than it ever was in the past, right? And this might be incontrovertibly true for everyone at all times, just like, say, the earth is heating up at all the time. Of course, I'm sure we'll speak broadly with a context of India in mind, given our lived experiences. We should, like I said, distinguish, much like Orwell did, between nationalism and patriotism, right? Patriotism
Yeah.
is a positive emotion, in the sense that it's where you take pride in what you are and you're happy about your own country or your own set, your clan, etc. Nationalism is not just a positive emotion, because not only does it involve taking pride in your own subgroup, but it also involves actively denigrating other subgroups with real or
Right.
imagined stories to go with it. I'm sure we've all experienced, the WhatsApp takeover of Indian media, let's
Yeah.
put it that way, or the Indian
Yeah.
public collective thought, and the role that WhatsApp University has to play in it. We definitely see a lot of the latter in operation, right? There is a lot of history that is getting redesigned, not just of India, but also of other countries, to try and make India look better in the minds of a perceived few. I've always found it interesting. I don't know what it is about my lived experience, but somehow I've not felt nationalistic or patriotic. Let me
Yeah.
put it that way. Beyond, of course, the cricket field. It's amazing how pride for this country, this concept of India, suddenly kicks in when I'm
Yeah.
watching cricket,
Correct.
or other sport for that matter, and absolutely leaves the room, exits stage left the moment I switch off the television after cricket match, or a few days after the warm afterglow of a wonderful victory in cricket, or any other sport, even the Olympics, for instance, which are coming up now. Olympics or any other sports.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, why do you say
No,
that?
no, because we'll come to, I believe it is
Yeah.
Karthik Krishnaswamy's tweet around Sumit Nagal, I want to say, right, at some point.
Okay,
Uh,
okay, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm exactly that, right? So, especially the Olympics. The only reason I follow the Olympics, really, is because
Yeah.
I seem to have some residue of pride
Yeah.
in the concept of being an Indian.
Yeah.
And the only reason I watch any of the events at the Olympics, which don't really excite me, I'm not really excited
Yeah.
by javelin throwing, or, all the other things that happen in the Olympics, archery, or boxing, which I don't watch or follow at
Yeah.
all at any other point of time, except for once in 4 years. But suddenly,
Yeah.
I'm like really rooting for my country to win a few pieces of metal.
Yeah.
And I find it strange myself. So, yeah.
Yeah. Essentially, what you're saying is you feel pride at one level, but you're not doubling down on it, which is to say, you like Indian, but not Indian too. Is this what you're saying?
Oh, yo. Oh, my God. Yeah, this probably won't make the edit. Probably should not make the edit. So, um, I'm a self-professed massive, massive fan of Kamal Haasan, as I've
Why
mentioned on
is
this
this
podcast.
something that shouldn't make the edit?
No, it can. I mean, it's not really related to the topic, but yeah, you can. So, and I've been looking forward, and I've really enjoyed almost all the movies of Kamal Hassan that I've watched. Right. So anyway, I was looking forward to Indian 2, which is the sequel to Indian 1, which came in
Yeah.
1996 and was a blockbuster. One was the film which won him his third national award, and Indian 2 is arguably the worst film I've ever seen, and I don't think, and this is not definitely not a unique opinion.
There are zero people who are arguing with this opinion. I think
Yeah,
everyone.
I literally haven't met a single person who has anything good to say about this movie. As a huge, decades-long fan of Kamal Hassan and someone who was looking forward to this film for so long, I went and watched this on the first day. I was so disappointed after I watched this film, and this has been a consistent thread at least for the first week after I watched this movie.
Yeah.
Every morning when I wake up, one of the first thoughts that comes to my mind is, oh damn, it was not a nightmare. That film actually did come out. It was real. And I continue to live in a universe where that film got made, and I
yeah.
happen to watch it, and I have to continue to live there. And I'm like, another
Yeah.
day in this universe. Yeah.
Yeah, same
Anyway.
as November 19, 2023, or whatever that final state was. But again, sort of try to get at least parts of this to make the edit, right? You mentioned Kamal Haasan, who's played a bunch of different roles. But as you told us in the WhatsApp group this week, if Kamala Harris does become the president of the US, she wouldn't even be the first Kamal Ha to become the
KH.
US
Kamala
president.
Harris.
Because
Because
Kamal
Kamal
Hassan,
Haasan famously acted as George W. Bush in his 2005 film Dasavataram, which was one of the 10 roles that he played. It's a very
oh
interesting
yeah,
makeup where he doesn't
yeah,
really look like George W. Bush, but if somebody tells you there is this person who's trying
yeah,
to act like George W. Bush, you will see the resemblance there. And
yeah,
even has a couple of interesting lines, which he actually speaks with
yeah,
a quasi-American accent.
yeah,
It sells the man. So yeah.
yeah. So the Kamala Harris reference, basically, and I will bring it back to nationalism first before we take it on to patriotism, is that she's gone viral this week, right? Now that Joe Biden has stepped down and endorsed her for the role, but there have been like a lot of people who've been sort of uh, lining up behind her with lots of memes, right? So one of the things that she mentioned is what her mother used to tell her all the time. She says that my mother basically said, "Look, you think you fell out of a coconut tree? No, right? Like everything exists in a context." Bringing it back to something like nationalism, right, which essentially is different from patriotism, and we didn't read the same George Orwell essay, so I have something new to add. Is that you have a right to a state or a nation state by virtue of sharing some characteristic traits, right? And considering that we grew up in a country that is less than uh, 80 years in existence, right? We have been given a country by the sacrifices made by a lot of people, right? Like if they hadn't sort of put together the notion that we have a right to self-determination and self-rule and the need for a nation per se, and fought for that right, we wouldn't even have existed, right? So I think in some sense it is a privilege for us to now say 8 years later, look, all of this shit doesn't matter. Like we are where we are, we can do what we want to. But at the same time, I think it would be remiss on our part to sort of acknowledge the fact that unselfish acts of sacrifice on the part of a large enough group of people, which was stirred up probably by the spirit of nationalism, is important, right, for a bunch of Asian, African countries around the world in that respect. So most of the world is full of like new countries, right? So in that respect, I feel there is a merit.
Oh, absolutely. That Orwell essay that we were talking about, of course, is called Notes on Nationalism. It's available in full, and it's a fairly long read and an interesting read. So I would recommend it to all our readers. But one of the lines he writes early in the piece, right, which kind of stuck with me, is that this very idea of nationalism stems from this habit of assuming, and I'm quoting Orwell here.
Yeah.
First of all, the habit of assuming that human beings can be classified like insects,
Mm.
and that whole blocks of millions or tens
Correct.
of millions of people can be confidently labeled good or bad.
Yeah.
For me, it really stems from that, right? And you're absolutely right when you talk about the freedom revolution or the independence movement
Yeah.
that won India and won all these countries' independence, because an independence or any kind of unrest, right, that succeeds happens
Mm.
at a time when there are two groups of people who are actually at polar ends of the spectrum, right? And
Correct.
it's very easy to see from the Indian point of view at that stage, let's say in the 1920s or 1930s,
Yeah.
where you had a country that was being oppressed, and it was very clear that the oppressors could be painted by a black brush, right? It was very
Mm.
clear who the enemy was and who had to really fight for their freedom.
Yeah.
We should continue to have gratitude, though it has been whatever 70,
Yeah.
75 years
Yeah.
since and absolutely we should have gratitude. But does the polarization that was valid at that point and was
Correct.
required at that point also to
Correct.
overthrow the oppression, does it continue to be valid, or in, as to paraphrase Orwell, are the ants still standing in line across multiple different borders, or is it not really
Correct.
relevant, because people like
Correct.
ants do change with time and move with time, right? And our own positions also change with time, right? So sure, we should be proud of what happened. We should never forget what happened. But what does that
Correct.
mean in the context of what our lived reality now is? Because right now, the British oppressors have absolutely no role to play in our real or perceived slights or troubles, right? Of course, we have other challenges.
Yeah.
We have other countries that continue to
No,
threaten our existence, of
100%.
course.
Yeah. Completely agree with you, right? I think it was Mahatma Gandhi who basically said that the Indian National Congress should be dissolved once we got the independence, right? Because the stated objective of that organization was to win independence, right? And not to be a
Yeah.
political party to rule, right? So, taking that forward, while we sort of have gratitude for all of the people who fought to make India what it is, and it is such a blessing that we got to grow up in a free India where there was a constitution that upheld some of the universal laws that we'll still continue to fight for. I think the point is that in the context that we exist in, maybe this construct is not relevant anymore, right? So, if you were to apply the same principle and say what is the zeitgeist of our time, or what is it that is worth fighting for, probably a kid born today, or maybe even 20 years ago, would probably look at something like climate change and say, how do we sort of come together as humanity to fight it, right? In the same
Yeah.
spirit as nationalism existed maybe 80 years ago. I think that's the distinction that we're making, that
Yeah.
every idea has a time and a place, and maybe nationalism's time is over.
I think you put it very nicely, right? And you're talking about the next stage of evolution where you start looking beyond national borders because
Yeah,
the community has gotten bigger. The community is the entire globe, and we need to work
yeah,
together to make it better. And
yeah,
our enemies really are not other people or other countries or even
yeah,
other planets. But if you had to go one step behind or one step before even nationalism, right? You mentioned you grew up in Kerala, and we've had multiple references to Kerala already
yeah,
on this podcast. I grew up in Tamil Nadu, and I studied Tamil in school, right?
yeah.
Now, Tamil Nadu, as lots of people in India would know or would have sensed, right, if they have interacted with people from there, is an extremely proud state which takes a
Mm,
lot of pride in its own real and perceived richness of history and culture,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And as a school child, I was exposed to this in a big way when I studied Tamil or whatever
Mm,
passed off as the Tamil syllabus, right? So Tamil,
mm,
of course, is a very ancient language. It's one of the oldest languages in the world. So there are scriptures dating back to several centuries in the past,
mm,
which is all real. But there is also a lot of perceived or altered history. Like WhatsApp University, I almost feel
mm.
originated in Tamil Nadu because I have read entire pieces of prose as part of my Tamil textbooks, which
Yeah.
have claimed things like aeroplanes were invented in Tamil Nadu, like computers were invented in Tamil Nadu. So I actually believe that this entire concept of for nationalism
Yeah.
almost originated from Tamil Nadu, and this is probably true for multiple other smaller
Mm,
subcultures and communities, which
yeah.
eventually had to come together as a nation, right, to fight for independence. But what you're
Correct.
talking about is that the next layer of it's time now for the next layer of abstraction where countries actually come together.
Correct.
One great example of that, of course, is the European Union, right, which has
Oh,
managed
yeah.
to and it's a beautiful setup that they've managed to build, right? Common currency,
Correct.
a certain common framework that applies to the entire region, while every country continues to have its own individualism and its own pride, obviously, and its own
Yeah.
sense of nationalism slash patriotism. So, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
example that we probably as a civilization need to go towards. But we might actually be walking in the other direction because it does feel like the world has never been as polar as it is now.
Yeah, again, going back to that thing that we mentioned in the copyright episode, right? You'll obviously always feel everything was better when you were in your teens,
Yeah.
including world peace, etc. That notwithstanding, however, a couple of points. One is that you're always looking at a higher level of abstraction, right? There is this idea of expanding circles, right? Which is that initially you only cared about your family, then you start caring about your community, then you're looking at maybe a nation, and then humans as a whole, and then maybe
Yeah.
animals become a part of it, etc. Right? So one of the funny things that happened was that by virtue of having grown up Catholic, you're inherently taught that homosexuality is wrong. So I used to have these conversations with Rosanna to say, what if our children turn out gay, you should be okay with it, etc., etc. Right? And it was a conversation over a period of time to which she was finally like, yeah, I see the point, right? Like, I mean, we have to move past what we are taught. And then I was gloating, and her question was, I'll be okay if Emma says she's a lesbian, but will you be okay if she says she's vegan? And I'm like, oh fuck, like this is the next layer, right? Which is to say, why should it be restricted to humans alone? It should expand to animals also, right? So while we acknowledge that there is a ways from where we've come based on what we were taught in childhood, I also like to think that there is ways to go before we get to that point where whatever it is that we need to get to, right? Yeah, it's interesting.
Ever since you made that point about vegan, I've been grinning, and so I want to know whether you know what I'm grinning about.
No, tell me.
Because this is where we are going to introduce the very famous clip that went viral a few months back, which features the Tamil actor Silambarasan, also known as Simbu.
Oh man.
So nationalism or universalism, I don't know, we don't have a word for this. Like you said,
Yeah.
you start off with your family, you start off, then you have
Yeah.
your clan, your sub clan, whatever, then your city,
Yeah.
your state, your nation state, your country, and then eventually
Yeah.
the world, and then you said animals, and then maybe
Yeah.
plants also, because as Simbu has told us, plants are also living beings, if I'm not wrong, scientifically.
Oh, we don't drink milk, we are vegan. Vegan, okay. Plants is also a living being, if I'm not wrong. Scientifically. எதுக்கு நீ வந்து பிளான்ட்ஸை வெட்டி கொள்ற? அதுவும் லிவிங் பீயிங் தான் தம்பி.
Yeah, so we need to draw the line somewhere. And by the way, as an aside, I do believe the next frontier in food is going to be when we actually start eating insects. I don't know if you have, if I've already mentioned
low cost locusts.
Absolutely, man. That's the future, and unfortunately, I don't know where to source them because I think it's not yet anywhere near mainstream, except maybe in parts of Southeast Asia. But I look forward to the day when I can get my crunchy crispies, which are actually creepy crawlies, right?
The scientific term for this is entomophagy, right? Where you are eating insects. Basically, if you can find a bunch of locusts and grind them to powder, is the lowest cost, low cost locusts are the best source of protein.
You don't even need to powder them; like they have very nice crispy consistency.
It depends on your level of cringe. I mean, anyway, since we are on this road, there is a
we can get used to anything. We are after all the species that steals the mother's milk of other animals and drinks it, right? So
there
are levels of cringe we are willing to put.
That's not cringe, right? The cringe is that
Absolutely
I feel disgusted. That is a moral cringe. This is like I feel disgusted. Like fuck morality. I am thinking about only me.
Think about whenever agriculture first began, or whenever livestock and animal husbandry began. The first people to suck on the teat of a cow or would have definitely felt as disgusted as you are right now. But it's something that got normalized with time because
it's bottled, right? Like which is what I'm saying. Like if you grind locusts and put it in your protein powder, no one may care so much as opposed to if you have to eat a fried locust, right? But again, there is a huge level of hypocrisy because you're willing to eat a prawn or a lobster, which is basically a bug of the sea, right? It's exactly the same thing, just that one is in water, the other is on wings or land or whatever, and they are like in Australia they're called bugs, like the sea creatures are called bugs, like Moreton Bay bug, etc. is what it's called. So,
you mentioned the technical term, which is entomophagy in English, which means the habit of eating insects. In Malayalam, entomophagy is the angst expressed by a parent when their son comes out of the closet as gay. Entomophagy, you.
That's great.
I don't know if he'll get cancelled. There is this Andhra-based YouTuber who got cancelled recently. I put him in jail for something he said on YouTube.
When you grew up with digital marketing, the famous joke was, what's the best place to bury a dead body? It is on page 2 of Google search. But now I feel like the best place to bury a dead body is in leftover lasagna because no one's listening to it, man. Like, why are we getting so hit up about it? But
In Drishyam Part 3, Mohanlal hides the dead body in episode of Leftover Lasagna.
superb. But somehow to try and bring it back, right? You spoke of Tamil pride and all of that. There was this line that I learned while growing up. I think it is by Vallathol or one of the famous Malayalam poets, which goes, ഭാരതം എന്ന പേര് കേട്ടാൽ അഭിമാനപൂരിതമാകണം അന്തരംഗം കേരളം എന്ന പേര് കേട്ടാലോ തിളയ്ക്കണം ചോര നമ്മുടെ സിരകളിൽ, which means that when you hear the name India, your heart should swell with pride. But when you hear the word Kerala, the blood in your veins should boil. So he was sort of saying that while we are Indians, we are also, Keralites, and that's probably a superseding identity, right? So as circles expand, you're still holding what is close to you closer, right? Yeah, so moving on from the point of nationalism, right? The point about patriotism is essentially different, right? Philosophically, there are apparently 5 types of patriotism. But the best way to explain it is apparently consider that you're taking care of your father and who's aging, but you realize he's a heroin addict, right? Now, what do you do, right? So there are basically 3 options that you can do, right? One is to say that, okay, he's addicted to heroin, but he's my father, so he should be supplied with more heroin, right? Because that is what keeps him going, right? So why not? Second is to say, look, this is morally reprehensible. I should call the cops on him and throw him in jail because like he is committing a crime, right? The third is to say, I will stay with him and clean up this shit because he is my father, right? So this is realistically the 5 types of patriotism broadly compressed into one analogy. Which is essentially, there is this thing called extremist / robust patriotism, which is where you say the country is what it is and therefore we'll continue to feed it. The only difference between, let's say, extreme and robust patriotism is that the extreme patriot believes that whatever your country's leader tells you, you should do, right? So if like notes are demonetized overnight or you have to bang plates while a pandemic is going on, you should, because leader ne keh diya hoga to kuch soch samajh ke keh diya hoga and you have to do it, right? That's it. But the second tier, which is robust patriotism, is saying, no, I believe in the constitution that was set out, right? That was a social contract that we signed, and therefore I will still defend my country, but it will be not, I can still oppose the political party that is in power, right? So, but both of these guys will continue to feed their dad heroin because that is their moral obligation, right? Whereas a liberal or instrumental patriot is the one who says there are, higher moral values, and if your country is wrong, you're not responsible for it, right? You are basically disowning it and saying, like, I have other values. For instance, a liberal, in the sense a classical liberal, has probably, let's say, a religious code that they adhere to as opposed to just the country's constitution. So if it is against that, they basically say disown the country, right? And the final one, which is probably closest to what we are, even though you wouldn't like to admit it, Nitin, is moral patriotism, right? Where you are saying that, look, this is the country where I was born into, and I'm going to roll up my sleeves and try to make it better, right? You have so many ideas on how India can be fixed. That is an example of, not caring, right? But actually wanting to say that I want to make this place better in some senses, right? And sort of the point there, or the counter there, is to say, look, no one can fundamentally change a country, right? So what are you even trying to do? And the moral patriots counter to that is to say, even if it's in the smallest ways, I must do what I can do, right? Which brings us to the quote by AJ Musty. This is this guy who was a pacifist and a clergyman, I think, who was protesting the Vietnam War in front of the White House every day, right? And he kept it going for several days. I don't know if it's several years, but basically there was no response to his protest per se, right? So one day, finally, a journalist comes up to him and asks, look, why are you doing this day in day out? There is no change you're making, right? And AJ Musty's response was memorable, right? He basically said, I don't do this so I can change the country. I do this so that the country doesn't change me, right? So in some senses, probably that at the risk of reductionism, that sums up the kind of patriotism that we may find agreeable.
Absolutely. I think it's a great example, right? So I know this probably is going back to the earlier topic we were we spoke about, right? About the fact that at a time when we should be becoming less polar, we are actually seeing more polarization happen.
Yeah.
And this is a very interesting time to talk about it, specifically in India. We had the union budget that came out yesterday, and large parts of the country are up in arms because of the strange coalition that was formed this year, which meant that Chandrababu Naidu and Nitish Kumar had a huge role to play in
Yeah.
BJP securing their majority. It means that there are certain SOPs that have gone to Telangana and to Bihar in this
Yeah.
budget. And every other
Yeah.
state, of course, a lot of
Andhra
this.
and Bihar.
Sorry, Andhra and Bihar. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm never sure. I don't know why they keep making these changes. Right? They do have to take these changes. Screw this. When I grew up, there were 25 states. Now there are like 32 states or something. Like, what is they're like opening IIMs everywhere. They're opening states everywhere. But every other state is obviously up in arms, and a lot of this is, of course, just propaganda and media noise also, where every state is saying, "Oh, this government doesn't care about us, and I'm going to protest." I
Yeah.
happen to be in Bangalore these days with my parents in Bangalore. When I
Yeah.
visit my dad, I get a unique window into Tamil news because he watches the Tamil news religiously every day. And yesterday, I was watching Mr. M.K. Stalin, who is the chief minister of Tamil Nadu, addressing the media and saying how he's going to protest this stupid budget by not participating, by whatever way he's going to do something. Yeah. Anyway, but one of the things,
Yeah.
as a very casual aside, in a conversation about the budget, he mentions this almost offhandedly, where he's telling people of Tamil Nadu and shopkeepers, specifically or business owners in Tamil Nadu, can you please start putting up the names of your establishments in Tamil everywhere? And you
Oh
should
my
be
God.
doing this, and you should be doing this without me having to tell you. And he says it very casually because I don't
Yeah.
want Tamil Nadu to stop looking like Tamil Nadu, right? And I
Yeah.
think these sorts of movements have happened, right? I think Karnataka had this a few years back, and now I think in Bangalore,
Yeah.
for instance, I
No,
see a
right
lot of.
now, right? You remember what they just rolled out and rolled back, which was to say
Yeah,
that 50/75% of employment should go to Kannadigas in that
exactly,
sense, right?
right.
Yeah.
And we are all very removed from this reality now. It's not something
Yeah.
that hits us, but I'm sure it's going to hit a lot of people who
Of
currently live
course.
in Karnataka, right?
Of course.
What I've been seeing though is a lot of well-educated, I should say, Twitter accounts originating from Karnataka coming out in support of this idea that Karnataka should have, quota for Karnataka people within, within companies and whatever jobs,
ಈ
etc.
ಸಾಲ ಕೋಟಾ ನಮ್ದೇ.
Oh, that would be interesting. Imagine if there were a Kannadiga quota for the RCB IPL
Yeah.
team. It's very
Oh, this
possible
was
that
the
they would
other
actually
tweet,
start
right?
winning. Yeah, yeah. KL
This was
Rahul
the
is
other
the first
tweet.
beneficiary
Yeah, correct. KL Rahul is the first beneficiary.
because he's going to come back to RCB. But
Yeah.
Karnataka actually is a great example to show exactly why this doesn't make sense, right? I'm not an old timer in Bangalore. I've lived in Bangalore for 15 years before I moved out. But
Yeah.
people who saw the Bangalore experience, right, through the 80s, 90s, largely and beyond, I've actually seen how the city has transformed, right? And
Yeah.
and in the sense, like a rising tide lifts all boats is something that's very true, right? Now, yeah, it's possible that lots of people from outside of Karnataka came and benefited
Yeah.
by the fact that, or from the fact that Karnataka became India's quasi Silicon Valley and invited
Yeah.
a lot of English-speaking, upwardly mobile people, ambitious people to come and build the city out. But
Yeah.
but what that then means is everyone who is already in the city, right? The locals have also benefited from it significantly, right? Which is the whole argument for free market enterprise and capitalism that people come up with, because
Yeah.
while capitalism will always mean that there are 5 or 10 multi-billionaires who seem to have 90% or 95% of the wealth with them, it also means that
Yeah.
everyone's life, even people at the very bottom rung, even their lives get
Yeah.
better, significantly better than what it used to be. And that's what we should aspire for. And not so
Yeah.
much for, it's not the right analogy. I'm not saying
No.
Kannadigas are the
Yeah.
bottom 5%. That's not my point.
Yeah.
But the whole free market enterprise has definitely benefited Karnataka. And going insular and imposing random quotas that don't actually make any sense more than, in the most linguistic term, win anything more than votes is my humble consideration.
Yeah.
And Bangalore is the greatest example. People who have lived through Bangalore will actually say that, yeah, hang on, this place is better than what it used to be. Not if
Yeah.
you're stuck in Silk Board traffic, but otherwise, yeah.
The counter contention there is that it's not a rising tide that has lifted all boats. The tide has not risen, but the groundwater has gone down even lower. So much so that Bangalore doesn't have any water because
So it
of
has foam.
immigrants like you coming over and taking over.
Coming over, not just coming over, it's coming over.
Yeah, it's coming over.
But that's the thing, right? Now there's no water in the lakes of Bangalore, but we instead have foam, which really represents the creamy layer
Yeah.
of highly, talented people who came over. But yeah,
So on one end you have nationalism slash patriotism. On the other end, what we are essentially talking about is cosmopolitanism, right? So
yes,
the sort of counter there is to say that obviously culture is a function of history, legacy, at least the immediate history and legacy and time, right? So now if we are sort of saying that free market economics, which means that free movement of people to any country, any part in the world, as long as they find it a win for them and a win for the country is acceptable, how do you look at something like, cultural change that happens to places? Is that not important at all? For instance, Ireland famously
yeah,
had been badly done by England for several years together. Then they had to like get their economy out of this thing, and they basically created tax havens, attracted a lot of tech companies because they're English speaking, etc., etc. Which now means that the Irish who live there do not have the ability to, let's say, even purchase homes or find their culture suddenly being changed, or Canadians for that matter, which is finding a lot of Indians coming in,
yeah.
and like a huge cultural change is happening. So what are your thoughts on this particular aspect?
Oh, so the biggest example of this is in Spain. And I think this was in the city of Malaga, which I happened to visit a few months back, right, as a holidaying tourist. Thankfully, a few months back, because what happened a
You are
couple of
always
weeks
on
back
holiday, we
was
know this.
always on holiday. But what happened a couple of weeks back was the locals actually came and started pouring water. Like they just started flinging water at tourists to chase them away, saying that these tourists have come, they've crowded up the place, they've made the place expensive, and it's becoming unaffordable for us locals. I don't know the answer to
Yeah,
this.
forget Spain. Let's look at Goa, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's the correct angle here?
You know what's interesting is that Goa now is actually the most developed state in India, right? And there are certain parameters on which the Goa's GDP is higher than any other state in India. Obviously, tourism is the mainstay for Goa. But apart from tourism, there are also lots of people from other parts of the country moving to Goa now and setting up a very cosmopolitan life, because again, it is this whole melting pot thing where people with very different sort of backgrounds, but with a shared, maybe less brutal nationalistic, jingoistic identity, tend to come and set up, a melting pot of sorts in a place.
Yeah,
And I don't know if you've been to Goa recently, but if you just scratch beneath the surface of Goa, right, beneath the partying and the beaches, which is what it is known for, you will find that Goa is full of extremely interesting activities that are happening all the time. Like there
yeah,
would be book reading, there would be jazz nights, there would be
correct.
live music.
Yeah,
So
no,
this is not
so,
just the drugs and the alcohol that it's famous for, right?
right,
So yeah, so I want to bring this back to your question, right? So what does
yeah,
that then mean for the locals, for whom this
yeah,
probably doesn't mean anything, and
yeah,
it just means that they're suddenly having to put up with
yeah,
intruders, for want of a better word, who are
correct.
coming and crowding
Yeah,
up a place and shitting all over it. The analogy is not very different from what the Indians must have experienced when the conquistadors showed up, right? Many,
maybe,
many
yeah,
centuries ago, right?
yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is, right?
No,
And
so
again,
one was
yeah,
basically imperialist colonialism. Currently, what you're
yeah,
experiencing is maybe capitalistic cosmopolitanism, but both,
yeah,
in essence, are
yeah,
disturbing local cultures in a way that's too quick, too soon. I think both of us agree that cosmopolitanism is the way to go, right? So, just to put that in context, it basically means that there is no one culture that is superior to another, right? You're basically saying humans all around the world are created equal. We may speak different languages, eat different foods, etc., because of where we grew up. But once we reach a certain age, you're able to sort of say, if I want to eat sushi, I can. If I want to learn to speak Chinese, I should be able to do that. That
yeah.
shouldn't stop me from something, or not.
And the
Or if
simple,
there are linked languages, like we use
exactly.
broken English just to communicate, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Right?
By the way, the simple abstraction of that is this corporate speak where they say you should be hiring as diverse a team as possible, because if you
Right.
have more women in your team, if you have more people of determination in your team, if you have more
Yeah.
people of different races in your team, you're just going to
Right.
get more ideas that you
Right.
otherwise would not generate,
Right.
even if you have extremely high IQ people of the same type sitting in that
Yeah.
room, because while they're all intelligent, they sort of are all looking in one particular way at the world. So
Yeah.
that's exactly the biggest argument in favor of cosmopolitanism.
Corporate culture actually is a really good abstraction. I think we should underscore that. To say that while we continue to live as we do in families, once we step into the corporate world, we abide by the culture, right? And mostly willingly, right? Otherwise, you can just switch companies. It's not overly difficult if you have a certain level of privilege.
Yeah. Again, I also tend to look very skeptically at the concept of corporate culture and about companies that claim to have a certain culture, because what we are actually saying is that culture is not something that needs to be static in time. Because once it becomes
Yeah.
static, then you're trying to drink a certain type of Kool-Aid. You're looking at a certain type of people to fill a certain type of persona that you have for what an
Right.
employee of this company should look like. But what we are actually saying
Right.
is, if you want a company to truly grow and evolve, and continue to make great ideas and great products out there, then it needs to keep getting in people with extremely diverse and different kind of takes and views
Yeah.
to the way they
No,
think and live.
the
But yeah,
yeah, the people may be diverse, but the value set is still the same, right? And they are not drastically different, irrespective of what
yes,
country you're from, which is why there is a universal abstraction of what you stand for, and which is why cosmopolitanism becomes relevant, right? It is broadly around free speech, agency of people, consent. Basically, just don't be an asshole is probably
this works
the
always.
that's it.
Yeah, I don't think we have an answer for what is
Yeah.
the solution for the locals in Goa
Yeah.
or for the locals in
Yeah.
Karnataka who feel hard done by.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I think that is how this podcast works. So
Correct. No, of course, that is how this podcast works. One of the funniest tweets I saw, I think a couple of weeks ago, was during the Euro final. One guy was basically saying how England looks poised to win because the Englishmen were singing their national anthems loud and proud, while the Spanish stood quietly with their hands on their chest but not singing their national anthem, right? And then he adds a subtweet saying, "Oh, I've just realized that Spain doesn't have words in its national anthem, right?" And why they don't have words in their national anthem is interesting because they used to have it previously, I think during whenever it was the king's rule. And then obviously there was this dictator who came on and like added words to it, which then they later removed, and they never finally got around to accepting a version with words, as opposed to England, which still has God Save the King / Queen, which is really, really stupid, right? So, in that sense, maybe Spain over England, not just in football, but also in terms of choice of words for the national anthem, right? I think that is a better place to be.
very interesting take. That. I wanted to ask you, Tony. In I think it was February 2019 when India were playing
Wow.
Australia in a one-day series at home, and India had taken a rare 2-0 lead in that series going into the third one-dayer. When I think Virat Kohli was the captain by then, or was it MS Dhoni? No, Virat Kohli was the captain of the Indian team, but
Yeah.
MS Dhoni
Fully.
was still a very senior member of the team.
Hmm.
MS Dhoni, of course, strongly believes in the Indian Army and is also
Yeah.
he has a title right in the Indian Army, and he goes and trains with them and all of that.
Wing commander, I don't know,
So
something.
wing commander, yeah, he also wings it as if he's a real army man, much like his
With
father.
the paratroopers, something.
I don't even understand how these units work, right? So, but
Yeah.
yeah, anyway. But at MS Dhoni's behest, the entire Indian team came out with a slightly
Yeah.
modified
Yeah.
gear for that game, where they
Yeah.
all wore caps that were actually
Yeah.
army camouflage caps.
Yeah.
And this was to express solidarity with the victims of the
Yeah.
Pulwama attack. And the Indian team also donated some money to that cause.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts when that happened? This was, of course, a match against Australia, not against Pakistan or
Yeah.
against China
Yeah.
or whoever, the other countries that tend to be aggressive across the border to India. But India went on to lose that match, I must say, and went on to lose the
Yeah.
next two matches as well and lost the series. And I remember on our WhatsApp group, we were like, ever since that cap came, these guys have been losing. And they continued to lose for a while before that trend changed. But of course, MS
Yeah.
Dhoni's team, the Chennai Super Kings, actually incorporated an army symbolism into their jersey itself, right?
Yeah.
And on their sleeves, they have the camouflage things. By the way, as an aside, whenever I see somebody wearing camouflaged, that camouflage pattern clothes, I'm like, oh, I can't see you. You're blending into the background. Are you there? But yeah, that's
Yeah.
just a joke.
John
I
Cena.
can't see it.
The best one of this was one guy who was wearing a high-vis jacket and camouflage pants, right? And someone's like, "Bro, do you want to be seen or not? Like, what is happening here?" Like,
He's seen and
It's a-
unseen. He contains multitudes.
No, so you've basically set it up for my most controversial opinion. It is that obviously, like that particular act at that time, great that they donated to a cause where people lost lives, and I feel like the single biggest tragedy in the times that we live in are that people can still lose lives because of the selfishness of other people, right? Intentionally. And therefore, to extend that logic, a lot of this is also dependent on where I come from, which is Kerala, which obviously hasn't seen wars, etc. Um, but has seen a lot of families, upping their livelihoods thanks to nurses going abroad. Is that if you think about it, soldiers are extremely overrated in 2024, and nurses are extremely underrated, right? So
Oh.
if you think about it in terms of risk to human life, we've been through a fucking pandemic where I don't think nurses ever got a break, right? And they've basically been putting themselves at risk, whether it is in wars or whatever pandemic happens. Nurses are always on the front line, right? And they are treated like shit in the sense that nobody really cares, right? Like you get probably whatever little salary you get unless you go abroad where there aren't people who are willing to do that job, because at some senses it is a very physical kind of labor, right? At the same time, you are literally tasked with saving lives left, right, and center. Whereas on the other side, and no offense to people in defense, etc., it is a very sort of controversial take. I understand that. Is that, look, you're doing a job, man? Like you're like writing an exam, you're qualifying, you're passing tests to basically take on a job, right? And I don't think it is adding to nation building more than any other job that exists, right? Of course, there are instances where you are faced with a choice of loss of life, etc. But as long as it's man-made, I mean, it's not something that should exist in the world, right? For instance, if a group of soldiers, etc., are saving people who are stuck, let us say, in a landslide or some of those things, then yeah, I mean, full respect. But placing it against nurses, I think soldiers, armies around the world are in general over revered, overprotected for just a job at the end of the day. There you go. This will end my career as a podcaster and a human, because now I'll be cancelled left, right, and center.
No, it won't. I think you've raised a very, very interesting point. So, firstly, my grandmother was my mother's mother, who I have never met, was a nurse and came from very limited means. And my grandfather and she were both working, and they had three daughters back then. Not easy to raise them, right? And my mother keeps telling me stories of how her mom used to take care of home and take care of her patients under her care. You're absolutely right. Nurses are extremely undervalued, extremely underappreciated, and there is a certain. You only get into that profession because of a certain altruism and a certain. It is not the
Not
easiest job in the world.
necessarily, not necessarily.
It's I wouldn't say altruism, but unless you have a certain love for people, for strangers, you're not going to get into
Yeah,
that job, right? Because you need to see people at their weakest, at their worst, very often at not their easiest to manage for many ways,
yeah,
for many
yeah,
reasons, and you cannot afford to drop your composure as a nurse, right? You
yeah,
need to always have hold it together.
yeah,
It's extremely physically demanding job, apart from being emotionally and mentally
yeah.
also demanding,
Correct.
right? And you're right; they're not paid in
And
an
round the
ideal world.
clock, right? It doesn't matter if it's
And
two
round
in
the
the
clock.
night, right?
Yeah, round the
Yeah,
clock. That's the thing, right? Doctors get a lot of respect. Nurses don't get respect from the same people who happen to be the attenders or the patients. And arguably, the nurses do the harder job, right? Like at least physically, definitely the harder job. Emotionally, the harder job too. Maybe
yeah,
not intellectually. In an ideal world, teachers, nurses, conservancy cleaners would be getting paid a lot more for the work they do,
yeah,
because
yeah,
they actually make the world livable for the rest of us. But
yeah,
yeah, that's how it goes, right? There are certain jobs that aren't high paying because nobody wants to do them, and there are
yeah,
certain jobs that aren't high paying even though
yeah,
not everyone can do them. And I think
yeah,
nursing falls in that category round two.
yeah,
But since you compared nurses with people from the
yeah,
army, there was another essay that I was reading, and this was written by Mukul Kesavan in the India Forum. Right, it's a very
yeah,
long article which I could not finish reading before our recording. And one of the
yeah.
things he talks about, he mentions nationalism in sport, and
Hmm.
and he brings out why sport and nationalism, both of these, are actually very, very male-dominated pursuits,
Hmm.
right? Um, this is not to say the Serena Williams or the Sania Mirzas or the Saina Nehwals of the world don't exist,
Smriti Mantana.
but we can all agree that generally, if you go to a sporting event, the people you see both on the field and outside the field tend to be 90% male. And the reason for that, I think, is sort of reflected in the fact that army people get a lot more respect than nurses do. I just, in my
It
mind, drew an
is,
analogy there. Yeah.
yeah.
One of them
So
is male
sport,
dominated, one of them is not. So,
yeah,
yeah.
sport is war minus the shooting, which sort of gives you the tribal feelings of a country, and army is really war with the shooting, right? So it
Exactly.
gives you extra tribal macho dominance thing, right? And so the comparative I was really trying to draw was, if your point, and this is what like several people make, is that army save lives, nurses save way more lives, right? And
Yeah.
also, armies are cruel to their own people frequently, right? I am saying this as a hypothetical because I don't want to be cancelled. Is that the Indian army probably has committed more atrocities against Kashmiris than anyone ever has. Now, if you are at the end of the day saying it is about extreme patriotism and whatever orders you're given, you have to abide by it, and I'm sorry, man, I don't have too much respect for you, right? Like, at the end of the day, you have a choice whether to do it or not. And I understand these are not hard choices, but like, yeah, you can continue to do what you do, but then to sort of say that we need special favors, etc., doesn't cut ice with me, right? I'm not saying that nurses need to suddenly be given more respect than army. I'm saying the army can be taken down a notch. Realistically, and probably I'm a foolish peacenik slash pacifist, I don't think there should be like cross-border enmities that exist at all, right? In 2024, if you're not able to solve things through dialogue and negotiation, then there's something fundamentally wrong with you. And we are saying this when we are seeing the IDF either being valorized by the West or being spoken of in terms of, there are two angles, right? One is to say that, yeah, they're doing what needs to be done against Hamas. Where the fuck is Hamas? No one knows. Secondly, they're saying these are a bunch of teenagers. Why are you sort of judging them so harshly, right? You can't do both. You're saying that they are extremely clinical targeters of enemies, and you're also saying that they're hormonal teenagers who can just go around on a violence spree, right? So in that sense, it doesn't cut ice with me at all.
In an ideal world, yes, right. I do hear you when you say in 2024. You actually said the kind of stuff I normally say on this podcast, which is that, I can't believe that people cannot
Yeah,
settle their differences by talking.
correct.
But obviously they can't, right? And there are examples
Correct.
everywhere. Donald Trump is going to rebuild that stupid wall that he was building once he gets elected. And you're going to have, India and Pakistan continue to skirmish, and everyone has a very different map of India, right? Controversially, we all grew up, we look at a certain map of India where Jammu and Kashmir look very different from what the
Mm,
Chinese see, what the Pakistanis
yeah.
see, and now as it emerges, what the whole world sees. So India has its own world map. Everyone else outside
Yeah.
of India sees India's map very differently, right? So clearly, dialogue is not solving that, and it's the same thing that you're seeing in, with Hamas and Israel and Palestine. I think the one shining example that continues to give us hope, at least give me hope, is the European Union. And for a second time on this
Mm,
podcast, I'll mention it because all those countries, if you look at their history, it's not like they did not have fractious histories. France
yeah,
and Germany
of
share a
course.
border, right?
Oh, yeah.
France and Germany, Poland is right there, right?
Yeah.
And all these countries, right? They've been at actual war, like I said. France and Germany, of course.
Yeah.
If over a period of not even 40 years, 30 years, if these countries
Yeah.
could put aside their past
Correct.
differences, come to
Yeah.
the table, use words, and actually adopt a common framework that is
Yeah.
pretty much removed their borders, right? There are
Yeah.
people who live in
When once again,
Switzerland.
when you don't share a language or a culture or anything,
It becomes
right?
easier.
With
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
with historical bruises and historical wrongs that they feel they've been done to them, right? But still they're
Yeah.
able to come to the table. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So different languages, every country is different. Every country has a very different take on what they eat, right? The Germans cannot stand the food that the French eat, and I think nobody can stand the food that the French eat, but and so on, right? There are people who live in Germany and work in Switzerland, right? There's like living in
Yeah.
Gurgaon and working in Noida, which actually feels like you're going from one state to another sometimes, which you technically are
Yeah.
because Gurgaon is in Haryana. You need to, if you get into the train in Gurgaon, you cross through a second state, which is Delhi, NCR, and then you end up in Uttar Pradesh if you're working in Noida, right? So you can actually take one train across three states. But it's like that. But it's institutionalized, it's fine, it's working beautifully. There is a certain common adopted framework, which is currency, conventions, etc.
Yeah.
And it just works, man. And maybe
Yeah.
that's the future. And hopefully, we'll all get to a state where, and it's not like these countries are not proud of. Like you said, Spain's national anthem is silent. Every country has its own pride, its own national anthem, its own culture, and they all live peacefully. Man. They're fine. They're not like
Yeah.
fighting with each other. Yeah. They have fun on the football field. They pull each other's legs,
Yeah.
but they all go back home happy and have a stiff one. Yeah.
Yeah. So is European Union the ideal? Is it like our friend Nityananda who bought a remote island and said, "Ye of similar tastes and cultures come together"?
Dear listeners,
is
this
it?
is the only podcast where Mohanlal can hide a dead body, Simbu can come and talk about veganism, and Nityananda can be spoken of in the same breath as the European Union.
Yeah, we are the equator of podcasts, Ecuador. Anyway, I guess the abstraction in that sense, even if it is not Nityananda's island, are gated communities which have rules unto themselves, right? Which
Oh, yeah.
which no one can question, or like it's very tough to get it past. And that is when you really see that maybe, sometimes dialogue doesn't work, man. You want to punch an uncle in the face at times about the stupid rules that are in the gated community itself. So yeah, who knows? When it comes to the concrete rather than the abstract, you really want to punch people, right? Maybe you're not such a peaceful
Always.
after all.
But we live in hope that we will be able to curb our aggression, that nurses will get paid more than soldiers, and we accorded at least as much respect as soldiers in the future. And we're more kind to everyone, regardless of which part of the country or the world they come from.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
can all be cosmopolitan and kind to the locals at the same time.
Yeah. Here's hoping you don't have to step out and speak in Kannada to hail an auto. Nitin. All the best with that.
Yeah, good luck to me. As an aside, my niece studies in Bangalore, and Kannada is compulsory for her. And she was teaching us Kannada songs and rhymes that she was learning. So there is a very funny I'm a Barbie girl Kannada version.
Sing it. Come on. Come on. You can't leave us hanging. Come on.
Na pere Nandini, na Bangalore Vardini. Utta sari illa. It's hilarious.
Amazing. On that note, this has been episode 4 square of Leftover Lasagna. Leave us a 5-star rating, not a 4-star rating, please. And if you really like us, actually, buy an Apple device, and can you leave a rating and a kind comment on Apple Podcasts, because that actually allows you to leave a comment. And I feel like that is more weightage for some reason in how podcasts are discovered. The other funny thing, Nitin, we've done 16 episodes of this show, but I feel like we've misclassified what this pod should be. And I don't think there is a category to which Leftover Lasagna belongs to. Right?
What have you classified it as? I have no idea.
Currently, it sits under comedy improv, right? And improv is Come on, man. This is not news. It's not self-improvement. It's not science. What is it?
It's self-improvement for us, probably.
Self-improvement for us. Yeah. No, this is actually a legit point, right? Because one of the ways in which, if you actually want to change things, is that, you have to basically imagine yourself as the future version of you that is complete. And then you fake it till you make it, right? So by virtue of, in some senses, performing to an audience and sort of wanting to sound like the kind of people who are thoughtful, considerate, etc., we are actually making ourselves those people in some degree, right? So it is self-improvement for us, I think. But that's not the category they're looking at. I don't want to be bunked in along with, who's that, Beer Biceps or some of the other people. Yeah. No semen retention in this podcast. Let's just be very clear. We ejaculate more than we should.
We squirt condoms and blood comes out.
Oh God, that's a logical endpoint.
The current classification of this podcast is actually a Kalasification, right? So Kalasal, as they say, is making fun of stuff in Tamil. But glad to have recorded an episode after a bit of a break, and thanks for hanging around and listening to episode 16 as we go past the sweet 16s in Leftover Lasagna. In case you're an Android fanboy and don't want to buy an Apple device, that's also fine. Just tell 2 or 3 like-minded people in your circles about our podcast, and maybe they'll also find it interesting. And
amazing. All right, thank you. Till we see you again. This is bye from Tony and Nitin.